Stephen Marder nemzetközi hírű reklámszakember. A filmiparból nyergelt át a művészetek reklámozásába, a világ talán legnagyobb kiadójának, a Random House-nak is több projektét sikerre vitte. Dolgozott az amerikai New Yorker magazin kiadó alapítvány alelnökeként, tagja a BAFTÁ-nak, a New York-i kulturális élet megkerülhetetlen alakja. Most arról faggatjuk, hogy hogyan lehet eladni az irodalmat az Egyesült Államokban. Good morning, Jonathan. Thank you very much for joining me this morning.
It's an honor to be here.
Well, you know, in Hungarian, we don't actually have a word for publicist. We do have, and we do use publicist, but it means a journalist who is writing opinion pieces in magazines. So what does a publicist do?
You know, no one should know that a publicist exists. A publicist is there to create excitement about a project. Different publicists do different things, but that should be the basic idea, to create excitement, to bring more people to it. The publicist should set interviews, make introductions, plan events for authors, perhaps introduce them to to literary festivals, arrange speaking engagements, do mailings, emails, blasts, and now, of course, social media. But it's all about exposing a product to the broadest possible audience. It's a function of marketing. At the Harvard Business School, they say that marketing is everything that happens to a product from the moment it's created in a factory to the moment it's purchased. A publicist is part of that as it impacts advertising, publicity, press relations, and sometimes special events. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, I do understand. So basically, a publicist is who is standing behind and make sure that there will be enough fuss and buzz is generated around a product for the audience to buy.
Publicist is there to offer the product to the widest possible audience. A publicist cannot ensure the success of a project, but he can at least make sure that people have the choice to take it because they've heard about it. They can't buy something they've never heard of.
All right. There's a famous bonmot you have, and even the Washington Post quoted this one. The book industry doesn't see itself as a part of the entertainment industry is a terrible mistake. And this is your saying. And you said this in 1996 when started doing the publicity for Random House, this events of Breakfast at the Random House, if I'm right. And it became an international success, both in the US and in the UK.
Look, I was really lucky. I wasn't head of the publicity department, although that was offered to me. I had a department called Special Marketing. The head of Random House was a brilliant man who died just this last year, named Sir Harold Evans. The best boss I've ever had, the most gifted journalist possible, and a wonderful writer. And he knew that really big books, breakout books, bestsellers, weren't just competitive with other books. They were competitive with movies and Broadway shows and picnics and anything that asked for leisure time and discretionary dollars. So for really big books, we talked about strategies, how to get them out of just the book pages. But for very literary books, there's a smaller market, and that literary world is important. But for breakout authors, for people who really impact culture, they need to be off the book pages and on the other pages. You know, book publicists typically didn't talk to gossip columnists. They were afraid of television. They didn't want to be any place but bookstores. We started doing things at Barney's department store. We wanted window space. We wanted all kinds of things that weren't traditional for books. And for the right books, for the biggest bestsellers of the period, this worked nicely.
Absolutely. Now, how you see now, do the book industry see itself as the part of the entertainment business?
The book industry is a famous invalid, and it's done things badly for a long time. The book industry seems, at least in America, dead set against doing the things that would make it profitable. There's constant change among the editors. They go from house to house, and frequently they're rewarded for the books they buy, not for the books that get published. The biggest problem I see is, although that there's some industry research that says people are reading less, they are publishing more books than ever before. More books are being pulped, more books are being not successful. And this has to do, I think, with publishing houses. They need to shrink their lists, but they also need to do a better job with the books they have. Books are no longer edited well by the book companies. Books are rarely indexed. American authors for nonfiction are being asked to pay for their own indexes, and books are rarely being marketed aggressively by their publishers. More and more authors are hiring their own publicists. They're hiring their own editors. The publishers have shrunk their responsibility to buying and printing and distributing. That means that they're tossing out more books than ever before, and although some of the authors are extremely talented, they don't benefit from the services that traditionally what publishers did to make a book great.
I see.
It's a strange motion.
Absolutely, but this is a trend all around the world, not just in the US. We have it here in Central Europe as well. So do you think there will be a change that's just profit-oriented? Now, if one book is a success, then, 10 less successful books just worthwhile because they don't really pay for the writers.
But one big bestseller pays at a publishing house for a host of books that fail. And that I can't disagree with. But the idea of not working aggressively with the authors, there's certain publishers who are trying to reverse this trend. Julie Grau is a brilliant publisher. Jonathan Karp is a brilliant publisher. And they are trying to give greater attention to individual titles. But until the industry does this as a whole, the market is still going to be flooded with a lot of mediocre books, which turns away readers and which makes it much harder for authors to have long and stable careers.
I see. Well, you started doing publicity work for arts with the Random House, but before you're coming from the movie sector, and you were doing publicity for movies.
I was lucky. By accident, a friend of my father's got me a job at a company that did publicity for movies and film stars. So early in my career, I worked on things like Rock Hudson's funeral, the Carol Burnett show, and Karen Carpenter's funeral. I did a lot of horror movies and teen movies. There was a period of my life where I did every major horror film: Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Chucky films. And this helped pay for art films like working on Cinema Paradiso and Madonna's Truth or Dare, or one I particularly loved, Paris is Burning, about drag balls in Harlem. In fact, we loaned them the first $5,000 for their publicity campaign, and I was only able to do this because of the horror films that we were working on, some of which I didn't have to watch to be able to market. But even for those, we could get clever about what we did for them. I left movie marketing actually to run the BBC's publicity in America. And that's where Random House found me. We had a series on PBS, Clive James, Fame in the 20th Century, which Random House had the book version of. The BBC had a great deal of Clive James programming to sell, and Random House wanted to introduce Clive to the American reading public. So I went to Sir Harold Evans and I proposed something. Clive was famous in London, but never really that famous in America. So I said, we need your help. The BBC will pay for everything, but Harry, we need you to use your contacts. And what we did was we rented a theater and we got Harry to put famous people on either side of Clive James. And he moderated the conversation about what is fame in the 20th century. Anna Wintour, the editor of Vogue, was on that panel. Liz Smith, the famous gossip columnist. I can't remember who else now. But what happened was the New York Times did a 3-quarter-page story on this event. The BBC was able to sell $1 million worth of Clive James programming, and Harry Evans came back to me and said, you have to come and work for me at Random House. Random House was the happiest time of my career. He was the best boss, the best collaborator. If you gave him an idea, he could just run with it. He was quick, he was facile, and he let me do all kinds of things that no one had ever done before in the publishing world. It was fun. It was fun every day.
I see. Now you're running several art projects, the publicity of art projects. What are the main challenges when it comes to an art project?
One of the things that has to happen is you need a strategy. You need an idea, and you need to take every project separately. Some very good artists or some very good works of art can be hard to market. So you have to look at it and find some angle that appeals to the public, or multiple angles. You know, a publicist actually has sort of two clients. There's the person who's paying them, the project you're working on. And then there are all kinds of different kinds of journalists, highbrow, lowbrow, newspaper, internet, television, and radio. A good publicist knows what each of them wants, and you reinterpret your client to fit those different things. So it's not everything about the client. It's not, you find a facet and you pitch it to each piece. Some clients resist doing publicity. That's always difficult. Some clients are convinced that they can do without it. Woody Allen, for many years, refused to have a picture of actors or actresses on his posters. He also wouldn't put the cast of his films on a poster. He wouldn't do interviews, which means that some of his best films made very little money, which is sad because some of them were marvelous. It's funny, I was actually with him the other day, and I told him how much I liked one of his last films, his very last film with Mia Farrow. I told him how much I liked Alice. And he said, "Oh, a movie that made absolutely no money." And I said, "Yes, and actually I worked on your movie Shadows and Fog." And he said, "Another movie that made no money." Now, Shadows and Fog was a difficult film. I'm not sure it could have ever made a great deal of money. But Alice was a fantastic movie and should have made a lot of money. I advise you to, if you love Annie Hall, go back and see Alice, a movie nobody remembers. But again, things that make things difficult. Sometimes there are projects where the people involved are unwilling to do publicity. Sometimes they're too big stars, or they're off someplace else and they're unavailable. Sometimes it's just the wrong time. There's cycles in media and there's cycles in the year, and there are times certain things are best to release. Sometimes you can try as hard as you like and something still doesn't catch on, and it's a pity. It's a jury system. The public has to decide. There are things that have gotten tons of publicity and never make a dollar. There are things that you try as hard as you can, and you can't get those authors or those artists arrested. It's a crapshoot, but if you work long enough, you have a better sense of what will and won't work. And more often than not, you're able to do what you can and make it work, at least to get the attention. Then the public has to decide they want it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, I do understand. So you feel it in your gut when you see a project, that whether it can be a success or not, whether you have a personal liking to the project or not, and this is how you decide when it comes to art projects, right?
Look, I don't take projects that I don't really like. I mean, if I have to see something in it that I love. A publicist is selling excitement. If you can't get excited about it, if you can't get out there and charge for it, it's much too hard to do. I don't want to do that. A publicist has to convey the thrilling nature of some aspect of every project. It's amazing to me. You can't quantify excitement. It doesn't come in meters or ounces or but you can feel it, you know?
I see.
And I hope, you know, it's funny, email is how we do more and more, especially younger publicists. I hear them very rarely pick up the phone. They do sometimes, but everything is an email, and email is very blunt, you know?
Absolutely. Jonathan, how you pick up an art project, how you decide whether a project is going to work in publicity?
One, it's funny, especially when it comes to books, because I know that's germane to your audience. Never trust anyone who hasn't read your book. Never get too quick an opinion. I always insist that I have to get a copy and I have to read the darn thing before I say anything about it. I like getting excited. I like artists. I'm a bad artist, but I know how to work with good artists, which is a pleasure for me. And sometimes it's the work itself, sometimes it's the personality of the person who makes it, and sometimes it's how that thought or that object or that book relates to the moment at large. Does it fit into the zeitgeist of the moment? It's interesting, the American publishing has had a very interesting cycle during the pandemic. Books actually sold quite well. During the beginning of the pandemic, when people were just confined to their homes, books on baking, cooking, and home decorating sold extremely well. Then with Black Lives Matter and the protests, political books quickly went up the bestseller lists. And more recently, because no one knows what the heck is happening next, works of fiction are selling quite well. So it goes in cycles. You have to be in sync with the zeitgeist, with the moment in America. But at the same time, I don't know, am I answering your question right, though? You were saying, how do I get excited? It can be many different things. But sometimes it's the project, it's the artist, it's how the project fits into the zeitgeist, or sometimes you just have to get creative. There's an exhibition, a very good one at the Museum of Arts and Design at the moment. We've gotten a great deal of attention for it. It's a dollhouse, an extraordinary dollhouse filled with hundreds of miniature antique objects. It looks like an Italian palazzo. The artist who created it got contemporary artists to make miniature works of contemporary art to furnish the dollhouse. We've had her on television, on all kinds of websites, and all kinds of magazines, but I couldn't resist. I wanted just a little bit more attention for the project. So we had the facade of the dollhouse reproduced in chocolate. The chocolate maker is going to go on television in America in just a few days. It sounds silly. At the same time, it puts the project out there on television. I mean, one of the basic principles of publicity is people have to hear about something more than once to choose to go to see it or buy it. You know, they hear it again, they hear it a third time. You hope then it sticks and they go, yes, I know about that. I want that. I'll tell you something silly I once did. I mean, when I worked on monster movies, we did all kinds of crazy things. For a movie called Warlock, I burned a witch at the stake in Central Park. It was a stunt. It was going to be a silly stunt. I got calls from a coven of male witches. They told me that warlock was a pejorative phrase. And they said that they were going to protest in Central Park, which I thought was the best thing possible. In those days, everything was a fax machine. I sent faxes to every TV crew in town saying, witches to protest in Central Park tonight. And I had 7 television crews. It was nothing but fun. But the best thing about it was a little bit of my stunt and the witches' protest. They would also show a clip of the film Warlock, because the clip is what sold it. My trick was to figure out a way to get that television clip onto television. Another silly one I worked on, when we thought everything we could for Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, there's just so much you can do for those actors. They don't really fit into the category of great actor interviews. So, but, in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there was this enormous saw, a nickel-plated gigantic buzzsaw, 6 feet long or 5 feet long, called Excalibur. We had these very large cakes that were baked to look like celebrity heads, Madonna, Donald Trump, and Michael Jackson, and we filled them with raspberry jam. We had a cake cutting party. We had to give all the television crews plastic bags so they wouldn't be splattered, but cutting those cakes with a saw, that got tons of television attention. Is that too silly?
No, absolutely. It makes sense. There's this saying that there's no such thing as bad publicity. So the more buzz is around the project, it's easier to sell. So what was your most challenging thing in your line of business?
I'm such an optimist. I come happy to most projects. Sometimes the biggest problem is the culture within a corporation. The fear of doing things that will get attention, whether it's a museum or a publishing house or a film company, there has to be trust in the publicity department that they're allowed to go out on a limb and do something wild. I'm not saying everything needs to be silly, but there has to be trust that, yes, it's worth it making the effort. Because often they're stuck in doing the same thing over and over again, which produces sometimes the same results, but less and less and less. So change, sometimes corporately, is a problem.
I see. You know, Central Europe is pretty much isolated because of the language barrier. So Central European authors are not really well known, except for a few exceptions, like László Kasztahorkai, who is a well-known writer, and there's a fan base in Brooklyn. I met them when I was there. But in general, Central European authors are not really well known in the US. Do you think what does it take to get into the?
I've been thinking about this, and there are a number of simple things that have to happen. What most important is the writing good and is the translation good? Because if the translation isn't great, it does the writer a great disservice. Secondly, how does the writer promote themselves? There's a huge fear, even among American intellectuals, of names they can't pronounce. It's very important for the author or for the marketing team working with an author to make it possible that you can relate, and being able to pronounce someone's name is very simple. Good design for the cover of the books and a good author's photo.
I mean,
I've seen so many terrible photos of authors over the years, even of great ones. I remember E.L. Doctorow, the author who wrote Ragtime, a number of bestsellers, sent a photo he liked that was taken on his deck at his house. He was sitting cross-legged in a chair, and because of the angle the photo was taken at, the bottom of his dirty sneaker was bigger than the size of his head. And I remember saying, what is the message here? You know, what are we trying to say? Except for foot fetishists, this is a photo that's not going to sell. A good-looking author needs a good-looking picture. A sexy picture is nothing to be afraid of. In fact, a good-looking author wearing fewer clothes is great, preferably on a motorcycle. How do you convey excitement? How do you convey in a photo what the author wants you to think about them? Not just a portrait, but some kind of messaging. And then for authors who are being published here, you know, America is not great about reading literature in translation. But if they are, these are my advice to you. One, begin communication immediately with your publisher early on, at least 4 months before the book is published. Explain that make yourself available to do publicity and be involved. Two, if you speak some English, work on it. Good English, being able to communicate in English is extremely important because American television and American radio and American writers do very few interviews through a translator. If you can, find out what your publisher's plans are for marketing and introduce yourself to the marketing team early on. Make a friendship with them. Offer up whatever they're asking for you. Do you have a good biography? Is your story, your personal story interesting? Is there a story about how the book was created? These things are very important for people who are working with your book to know. Check in with your publicity department regularly. You may think you're making a pain in the neck of yourself, but they have so many projects in front of them. The author that they know is responsive, the author who is friendly, the author who is easy for them to work with is the one who gets the most attention. It's funny, sometimes after a successful campaign, authors, particularly American authors, send their publicist or send the publicity department of the book company a gift at the end of the campaign. That's a gigantic mistake. Send it at the beginning of the campaign. Thank them early, make them feel appreciated, and get them working on your side because they do have things that they can do for you. It doesn't have to be something expensive. Candy, anything. But the idea that you want to have a relationship with the people who are marketing your book, that you're available to them, that you're willing to help them, that goes a long way. And I know this sounds simplistic, but it's really the way things get done. Most marketing departments at book companies have too much to do. You have to find a way to become the project they want to do. You have to become their favorite project. The other thing you can do is sometimes hire your own publicist, and that happens more and more. But the same thing applies. There are many mediocre publicists, but they're all in publicity. There's always too much to do. No one has the luxury of working on just one project at a time. So you want the project that's easy and friendly and the one that you get rewarded for. When they do something for you, say thank you. I know that sounds ridiculous and simple, but it works. The clients we like are always the best clients.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for joining us in this morning. And that was really a very interesting conversation. A kedves hallgatóknak is nagyon szépen köszönjük, hogy megnézték a beszélgetést, ami a PesText keretén belül készült, és várjuk Önöket más programjainkra is.
Next time in person in Budapest. I look forward to it.